The giant gave 3 commands: strip, kneel, swallow. Can the stable boy survive them all? A story of armor, wounds, and the things we hide. The first thing Finn noticed about the giant was that he was trying very hard not to fall off his horse. That was the image burned into Finn's memory forever. The massive silhouette appearing at the stable gate just past midnight. The torch above the entrance catching the edges of a man so large he seemed to block out the stars behind him. His horse, a gray destrier named Smoke that Finn knew well, was limping slightly. The rider himself sat rigid in the saddle with the kind of forced stillness that Finn, after 4 years of working in Lord Aldrich's stables, had learned to recognize immediately. It was the stillness of someone in serious pain, pretending they were not. Finn set down his lantern and walked to the gate. He was 19 years old, lean and dark-haired, with calloused hands and a way of moving around horses that was quiet and unhurried. He had worked in these stables since he was 15, and he had grown up believing that the fastest way to earn an animal's trust was to never show them anything you were afraid of. He had practiced that same philosophy with people, which was probably why he didn't flinch when the giant's horse stopped 6 inches from his chest, and the giant looked down at him with dark, exhausted eyes and said 3 words that changed everything. "I need help." His voice was low, controlled, but Finn could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "Sir Calder," Finn said carefully, because he recognized him now. Everyone in the castle knew the face of Lord Aldrich's champion knight, even if most of them had never spoken to him directly. Sir Calder Voss was 23 years old and stood nearly a full head above every other man in the fortress. He had fought in 6 campaigns, won 4 tournaments, and carried himself with a kind of contained, deliberate quiet that most people mistook for arrogance. Finn had watched him from a distance many times because Smoke was Calder's horse and Finn was Smoke's groom, but they had never exchanged more than a handful of words. "You're wounded." "That's already been established," Calder said. He looked down at Finn for a moment and then, very quietly, he added, "I rode back alone. I didn't want the healers to make a scene." Finn looked past him into the dark. No escort, no other riders, just this enormous man on a tired, limping horse, bleeding from somewhere beneath his armor and trying to hold his dignity together with both hands. "Get down," Finn said. "Carefully, I'll take Smoke." Calder's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, but Finn caught it. "I can manage." "Sir Calder," Finn said it quietly but firmly, the same way he spoke to horses when they were being stubborn for pride's sake. "Get down." Something shifted in Calder's expression. Surprise, maybe, or the kind of relief that a person allows themselves only when they've finally stopped pretending. He swung down from the saddle slowly, landed on both feet, and then immediately put one hand against Smoke's flank to steady himself. Finn caught his other arm without thinking. Calder was solid and heavy as a stone wall, and Finn was significantly smaller than him, but he took the weight without stumbling and guided him 3 steps to the stable's interior post before releasing him. Calder leaned against it, breathing carefully. Up close, Finn could see the damage clearly now. The armor on his left side was dented badly, the metal buckled inward around the ribs. There was a dark stain spreading through the gap between his pauldron and his breastplate. Not catastrophic. Finn had seen catastrophic once, when a knight had been brought in after a battle and hadn't survived the night, but bad enough. "I need to get the armor off," Calder said. "I know." Finn was already reaching for Smoke's reins, looping them over the post quickly. He'd tend to the horse properly in a moment, but right now the horse's rider took priority. "The buckles on your left side are damaged. I'm going to have to work around them." Calder looked at him steadily. "You know armor." "I know your armor specifically. I've cleaned it twice when you've left it with the equipment stores." Finn moved to his left side and began examining the damage with his fingers, reading the metal the way he read everything, methodically, patiently, without rushing to conclusions. "Some of these are going to have to be cut. I have shears for the leather straps." Calder was quiet for a moment, Then strip it. Finn blinked. The armor, Calder clarified, and something in his voice might have been faintly amused despite the obvious pain. Strip the armor. I can't reach the left side properly myself, and I don't want to make the wound worse pulling at angles. Right. Finn pulled his shears from the work belt he wore around his hips, the same belt that held his hoof picks and his curry comb and the small knife he used for a dozen tasks, and got to work. He was methodical about it, the way he was methodical about everything. He cut the damaged leather straps first, then worked the buckles on the undamaged ones, talking quietly as he did, not really to Calder specifically, but the way he talked in the stable when he needed an animal to stay calm. Hold still on this side, the metal's bent in toward your ribs, and I don't want to drag it across you. He supported the weight of the pauldron with one hand as he freed the last connection point and eased it away from Calder's body. There. Now the breastplate, can you lift your right arm? Calder lifted it. His left arm, Finn noticed he barely moved, deliberate, protecting something. It took 12 minutes to remove all the relevant pieces. Finn worked without hurrying, and Calder stood very still throughout, staring at a point on the stable wall with the fixed, distant expression of someone counting their own heartbeats. When the last piece came off and the padded gambeson beneath was visible, the extent of the damage was clearer. The left side was soaked through. Not arterial. The color was wrong for that, darker, but significant. How did this happen? Finn asked. Ambush on the eastern road, 3 men. Calder's voice was flat, factual. I managed. Clearly. Finn looked at the wound and then looked up at Calder's face. I need to clean this, and I need to see how deep it is. I'm going to need you to kneel. Calder's eyes came down to meet his. I beg your pardon. Kneel, Finn repeated, gesturing at the clean straw he'd been using as bedding for the new foal in the adjacent stall. Down here. I can't work at your height without making things worse. I need you lower. He held Calder's gaze steadily. Please. Another long pause. Finn got the impression that Sir Calder Voss was not a man who was asked to kneel very often, by anyone for any reason. But he went down onto one knee slowly, and then both, settling into the straw with a controlled exhale that barely concealed what it cost him. Good, Finn said. He was already moving to his supply cabinet, the one in the back of the stable that he'd stocked himself over 4 years with things that had proved useful. Wound-cleaning herbs, strips of clean linen, needle and thread for emergencies, though he hoped they wouldn't need those tonight. He brought everything back and knelt facing Calder, working quickly and quietly. The wound was long but not deep. A blade had gotten through the gap in the armor and sliced across the left side of Calder's ribcage, missing anything vital by what Finn estimated was approximately a hand's width of good fortune. He cleaned it carefully, watching Calder's face during the worst parts of it, ready to slow down if needed. Calder barely moved. He breathed steadily and stared at the middle distance and let Finn work, which Finn found oddly moving, this large, powerful man choosing to simply trust a stable hand he barely knew. When he was done cleaning, Finn mixed a small measure of the powdered willow bark and dried marigold he kept for exactly this kind of situation into a cup of water from the clean bucket. It was an old remedy. The cook in the main hall had taught him, years ago, when he was a young boy who kept getting scraped up falling from hay lofts. It wasn't magic, but it helped with pain and kept wounds from festering. Drink this, he said, handing it to Calder. Calder looked at the cup, then at Finn. What is it? Willow bark and marigold in water. It'll help with the pain. I've had worse pain than this. I know, Finn said simply. Swallow it anyway. Another one of those long, considering pauses. Then Calder took the cup, looked at its contents for a moment with an expression Finn couldn't quite read, and drank it down in 3 measured swallows. He handed the cup back without comment. Finn wrapped the wound with linen strips, working carefully, tying the ends off firmly. You should see Lord Aldrich's healer in the morning. This is cleaned and bound, but she'll want to look at it. In the morning, Calder agreed, which was clearly a concession. "Can you stand?" Yes. He stood on his own, slowly but without visible difficulty, which told Finn the man's pain tolerance was frankly extraordinary. He stood in the lantern light in his blood-stained gambeson and looked down at Finn for a long moment. "You didn't send for anyone," he said. "You said you didn't want a scene." Calder was quiet. "You didn't ask what happened, not really." "You told me what happened. Ambush on the eastern road, 3 men." Finn was already moving towards Smoke, reaching for the grooming brushes. "I don't need to know more than that." He heard Calder turn to follow him. Most people would have questions. "I have questions," Finn said honestly, beginning to work Smoke's dusty coat with practiced strokes. "I'm just not asking them tonight because you're tired and in pain and you'd rather not be, and talking about it won't help either of those things right now." Silence. He worked through it, tending to Smoke's hooves, checking for damage, finding nothing serious. A stone bruise on the right fore that explained the slight limp. Nothing that a few days of rest wouldn't cure. When he finished, he put Smoke in his stall with fresh hay and water, and turned to find Calder still standing there. "You should go inside," Finn said. "Sleep." "Where do you sleep?" Calder asked suddenly. Finn blinked. "Here, I have a room off the back." He tilted his head toward the small door in the stable's rear wall. "Why?" Calder seemed to consider this for a moment. "I'll sleep in the empty stall next to Smoke. I don't want to go through the castle tonight." Finn looked at him. The empty stall was clean and had good straw in it. It was also absolutely not a place where Lord Aldrich's champion knight should be sleeping. "You could," Finn said carefully, "or I could walk you to your chambers quietly. The back passage from the east corridor, we wouldn't go through any main hall." Another pause. "You know the back passages." "I've been in this castle since I was 15. I know all the back passages." Calder looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not quite softness, but a kind of careful attention, as though Finn had said something that surprised him. "All right," he said, "lead the way." And that was how it started. Not with a clash of swords or a grand revelation. Not with anything dramatic or shining. Just a wounded man on a tired horse at midnight, and a stable boy with clean linen and willowbark tea, and the 3 quiet words between them that neither of them would forget. Strip, kneel, swallow. 3 commands that Finn had given, and Calder had followed. 3 moments that, looking back, Finn would recognize as the first stitches in something that would take a long time to fully come apart, and an even longer time to put back together. Calder came back to the stables the next morning. Finn was in the middle of mucking out Smoke's stall when he heard the familiar heavy tread at the gate, and he looked up to find Calder standing in the morning light, dressed now in simple clothes, linen shirt, leather breeches, worn boots, without any armor at all. He looked different without it, still enormous, still carrying himself with that contained, deliberate quality, but more human somehow, more present. "How is he?" Calder asked, looking at Smoke. "Stone bruise on the right fore, as I thought. He should rest for 4 or 5 days before you ride him." Finn leaned on his pitchfork and looked at Calder steadily. "How are you?" "Lady Maren looked at the wound this morning." A slight pause. "She asked who had cleaned and bound it. I told her a friend." Finn absorbed this carefully. Friend was an interesting word from a man who had barely spoken to him before last night. "What did she say about it?" "That whoever had done it knew what they were doing." Calder moved into the stable and stopped beside Smoke's stall, reaching over to let the horse mouth at his fingers in greeting. She seemed surprised. "I didn't correct her assumption that it had been a knight." "Probably wise," Finn said. "Knights generally don't take advice from stable hands well." "I did," Calder said simply. There was a quality to how he said it, not defensive, not particularly warm, just factual, that Finn didn't know what to do with immediately, so he went back to mucking the stall. Calder stayed for nearly an hour. He didn't really talk much. He watched Finn work, occasionally asking a question about Smoke's care or the other horses, and Finn answered each one directly without fuss. By the time Calder left, Finn hadn't thought too carefully about any of it. It was only later, when he was eating his midday meal alone in his small room off the stable, that he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd spent an hour in easy company with someone without having to work at it. Calder came back the next day, and the day after that. It became, within the space of 2 weeks, a pattern. Not every day, Calder had duties and training and meetings that Finn only glimpsed the edges of, but often enough that Finn started expecting him. Started noticing when he was later than usual or when he didn't come at all. The conversations lengthened gradually, like a fire catching in green wood, slowly, and then suddenly with real heat. They talked about horses first. Smoke, obviously, but also the Lord's hunting stallion, who Finn thought was being badly mishandled, and the young mare in the far paddock who was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Calder listened to Finn's opinions on these things with what appeared to be genuine attention, which was unusual. Most knights treated stable boys as a piece of animated furniture, useful for specific tasks and otherwise invisible. Calder asked follow-up questions. He remembered what Finn had told him last time and referred back to it. Then they talked about other things. Calder had grown up in the northern provinces, which Finn knew only as a name on a map. His father had been a soldier, not a noble, and Calder had fought his way to knighthood through tournament wins and campaign service rather than inheritance. He said these things simply, without either pride or embarrassment, as though they were simply the geography of his life. Finn told him about his own history, which was simpler and stranger. Orphaned young, taken in by a cloth merchant in the town below the castle, who had treated him decently but had too many of his own children to feed. He'd found work in the stables at 15 because he was good with animals and the head groom at the time had been desperate for help. He had stayed because it turned out that he was very, very good with horses, and horses, unlike most people, were entirely honest with you. "You prefer animals to people," Calder said one afternoon. He said it without judgment, just observing. Finn considered this honestly. "I find them easier to read," he said. "They don't say one thing and mean another." Calder was quiet for a moment. "Most people do." "You don't," Finn said without thinking, and then felt something flicker in his chest when Calder looked at him directly. "No," Calder agreed. "I've found it's less work." They sat with that for a while, in the comfortable silence that Finn was learning was one of Calder's natural modes of communication. He didn't fill space with words for the sake of filling it. When he spoke, it was because he had something to say. Finn, who had spent years talking to horses when he was lonely because there was no one else, found this oddly restful. He found a lot of things about Calder oddly restful, which was strange because Calder was also, and Finn was trying very hard not to think about this too carefully, distractingly present. He was physically enormous and he moved with a precision that belied his size, and his hands when he touched the horses were unexpectedly gentle. He had a habit of listening with his full face, which meant that when he was paying attention to what you were saying, you felt it. He had dark hair that curled slightly when it was damp, and a sharp jaw, and eyes that were this particular shade of dark gray-green that Finn had not encountered before on any human face. Finn was 19, and he had spent 4 years in relatively isolated company, and he was beginning to understand that he was in some trouble. He tried not to be. He was genuinely trying. He focused on the horses and the work and the straightforward, uncomplicated pleasure of good conversation with someone whose company he liked. He reminded himself that Calder was a knight and he was a stable hand, and that certain kinds of things were simply not relevant to consider. He reminded himself of this quite firmly, several times. It didn't help as much as he'd hoped. 3 weeks after the night Calder had ridden in bleeding, Finn slipped off a wet fence rail and wrenched his ankle badly enough that he couldn't put weight on it. He sat down in the mud in the paddock and spent a brief, private moment saying several things under his breath that he would not repeat in polite company. Then he dragged himself upright on the fence, and tried to figure out how to get back to his room without putting pressure on the ankle. He made it approximately 10 feet before Calder appeared at the paddock gate. Finn had not heard him coming. He never heard Calder until he was already there, which was one of the more confounding things about a man his size. He moved quietly always, like he was choosing to take up less space in the world than he actually occupied. "What happened?" Calder said, reading the situation in a single glance. "Slipped," Finn said shortly. He tried to take another step and hissed through his teeth. "Stop!" Calder was already moving toward him with that unhurried certainty he brought to everything. He reached Finn's side and looked at the ankle with the same calm, thorough attention that Finn had used on his wound 3 weeks ago. "How bad?" "It's not broken. I know what broken feels like." He'd broken 2 toes at 16 when a horse stepped on his foot, and he'd carried on working for a week before anyone noticed. "Just wrenched." "You need to stay off it." "I have work." "You need to stay off it," Calder repeated, in exactly the same level tone, and something in his eyes carried a quality that reminded Finn uncomfortably of the way he himself spoke to stubborn horses. Finn closed his mouth. Calder put his arm around Finn's shoulders, and Finn's entire thinking process briefly went sideways. Calder's arm was very large and very solid and very warm, and it settled around Finn with a matter-of-fact ease that suggested Calder was not thinking about it at all, that this was simply the practical solution to the problem of getting Finn back to his room, and Finn was absolutely, categorically not going to make it complicated. He hopped. Calder supported his weight without visible effort. They moved back to the stable in silence. In Finn's small room, Calder deposited him onto the low cot with the same careful efficiency that Finn had used wrapping his ribs, and then sat on the upturned bucket that served as Finn's only chair and looked at him. "You should wrap that," Calder said. "I know how to wrap it." "I'll do it." "I can." "Finn." And there it was, his name, just his name in that low and steady voice, and the argument dissolved out of him. He let Calder wrap his ankle. Calder worked carefully and without rushing, and his large hands were incredibly precise, and Finn stared at a crack in the ceiling and thought about absolutely nothing. "When did you learn to do this?" Finn asked, because silence was becoming dangerous. "Campaign," Calder said briefly. "When you're in the field, you learn basic treatment quickly. There's not always a healer close enough." He tied the bandage off with a firm, neat knot. "Rest today. Tomorrow, if you need to walk, use the fence as support." "I have horses to tend." "I'll tend them today." Finn looked at him. "You'll muck the stalls." A pause. "Yes." "In those clothes." Another pause, slightly longer. "I have older clothes." Finn looked at him for a long moment. Sir Calder Voss, knight, champion, tournament winner, who had fought 3 men alone on the Eastern Road and ridden home bleeding, who was sitting on an upturned bucket in a stable hand's tiny room offering to muck stalls in old clothes. "Why?" Finn asked. Calder met his eyes directly. "Because you did the same for me." Finn didn't have an answer for that. He looked at the ceiling again and breathed carefully through the tight, warm thing that had taken up residence in his chest. "The bay in the 3rd stall is being difficult about his feed," Finn said finally. "He needs his bucket hung higher than the others. He's got a sore on his bottom lip, and it hurts him to lean down." "All right." "And the 2 grays in the far paddock need their water trough refilled. The pump sticks. You have to push the handle slightly to the left before it'll engage." "All right," Calder said again. "And smoke." "I know how to tend smoke." Finn shut his mouth. Calder stood, collecting the leftover linen strips from the wrapping and setting them neatly on the shelf where Finn kept his supplies. At the door, he paused. "Is there anything else you need?" he asked. The question was simple and direct. The way Calder was always simple and direct, but Finn felt it land somewhere deep, like a stone dropping into still water. "No," Finn said, "thank you." Calder nodded once and went to tend the horses. Finn lay on his cot and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. The spring tournament came with it all the flags and noise and temporary upheaval that turned the castle grounds into something barely recognizable for 2 weeks. Knights arrived from neighboring territories. A small city of tents went up in the eastern meadow. The stable took on 27 additional horses, and Finn, ankle nearly healed, worked 16-hour days with 2 borrowed hands from the town to manage it all. He barely saw Calder during this time. Calder was competing. Of course he was competing. He was Lord Aldrich's champion, and competing meant training and preparation, and the kind of focused isolation that Finn respected the logic of without knowing quite what to do with the sudden gap where their daily conversations had been. He watched Calder compete from the fence rail on the second day of jousting. He told himself he was watching because the horses were interesting, which was true but not entirely the point. Calder rode Smoke, rested and recovered now, moving beautifully in full tournament armor that Finn had not seen before. It was black-painted steel with a simplicity that looked almost austere beside the decorated plate of some of the other knights, and it suited him somehow. He won the joust, of course he did. What Finn had not anticipated and was not prepared for was who came to find him afterward. The knight's name was Sir Brennan Allward, and he arrived at the stable tent with 3 of his grooms and his 3 destriers, and an enormous amount of confidence about the allocation of stall space. He was, as far as Finn could tell, somewhere around 25, with sharp features and an easy charisma that he wore like a second set of armor. He had come second in the joust. "You're the head groom here?" Sir Brennan asked, looking at Finn with the kind of pleasant, slightly surprised expression that meant he'd expected someone older. "Yes," Finn said. "Good, then you'll understand when I ask you to move those 2 roans to make room for Perseus here. He needs the end stall, better ventilation, and he's particular about who he's housed near." He smiled, which didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure Lord Aldrich's champion gets the best of everything, but I'm afraid my horse has preferences." Finn looked at the end stall, which was where Smoke was currently housed, which Calder had specifically asked about on the first day of tournament setup. "The end stall is occupied," he said, "by Sir Calder's horse." Sir Brennan's smile didn't waver. "Yes, well, I imagine you can make an arrangement." "No," Finn said pleasantly, "I can't." Brennan's brows went up slightly. "I could speak to Lord Aldrich." "You're welcome to," Finn said. "In the meantime, I can offer you the 3rd stall from the left, which has excellent ventilation, and I've just had fresh shavings put down. Your horse will be comfortable. I'll check on him personally." There was a pause in which Brennan assessed him with new attention. Then he smiled again, differently this time, genuine curiosity maybe. "You don't back down easily." "I back down when someone gives me a good reason," Finn said. "You haven't yet." Brennan laughed. He looked at Finn the way people sometimes looked at things that surprised them pleasantly. "Fair enough. 3rd from the left, then." He handed Perseus's lead to one of his grooms and looked at Finn for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Will you come check on him this evening? I'd like your assessment of the tendon that's been worrying his handler." "Of course," Finn said, because whatever he thought of the knight's manner, the horse's well-being wasn't in question. He didn't think about the interaction much afterward. He was too busy. But he noticed, the following morning, that Calder had arrived early, and that Calder was watching Sir Brennan Allward's grooms working near the 3rd stall, and that something in Calder's expression was very carefully arranged to look neutral. "Good morning," Finn said. "Morning," Calder looked at him. "I heard there was an argument about stall allocation yesterday." Finn tilted his head. "Word travels." Always a pause. Brennan Allward asked to move Smoke. "Yes, I told him no." Calder was quiet for a moment. "He's persistent." "I noticed." Finn picked up his brush and turned toward Smoke's stall. He was polite about it, to be fair, just used to getting what he asks for. People like that usually are, Calder said. There was something careful in his voice that Finn couldn't quite parse. He came to watch the evening sword work yesterday. Did he? Finn said, not turning around. He asked about you. Finn's hands paused on Smoke's neck for just a moment. What did he ask? Who you were, how long you'd been here, a brief pause, whether you were spoken for. Finn turned around at that. Calder was standing with his arms crossed, looking at a point somewhere on the stable wall above Finn's head. What did you tell him? Finn asked. I told him you were the best groom in the county and that he'd be an idiot to make an enemy of you. Calder's eyes came down to meet Finn's. I didn't answer the last question. Finn looked at him for a moment, trying to read the gray-green of those eyes, trying to find the something that was either there or wasn't, that he kept half glimpsing and never being sure of. You could have told him I wasn't spoken for, Finn said. It's true. Calder held his gaze for 2 seconds, 3, 4. Yes, he said finally, I could have. He went to see Smoke without any further comment. Finn turned back to the stall and stood very still for a moment with his face pressed against the warm curve of Smoke's neck, feeling the horse huff warm breath into his hair. I'm being an idiot, he told Smoke quietly. Smoke said nothing, being a horse and therefore honest in the specific way horses were, which communicated quite clearly that yes, possibly. Sir Brennan Allward was, Finn came reluctantly to admit over the following days, not actually terrible. He was arrogant, certainly, and used to getting what he asked for, and he had a smile that he deployed with the deliberate precision of a weapon. But he was also genuinely interested in horses, knowledgeable about them in a way that went beyond mere ownership, and he was kind to his animals in the ways that mattered. He came to check on Perseus every morning and evening himself, which most knights didn't bother with when they had grooms to do it. He listened when Finn talked about the tendon issue and followed his recommendations without argument. He asked good questions. He also kept finding reasons to talk to Finn, which Finn handled carefully, because Sir Brennan was handsome and charming and interested, and those 3 qualities together could be a complicated combination to navigate when one was already confused about enough other things. You're different from other grooms I've met, Brennan told him on the 4th morning, leaning against the stall gate while Finn examined Perseus's left foreleg with careful hands. Most of them don't look you in the eye when they talk. Most of them are worried about saying the wrong thing to a knight, Finn said without looking up. I've had enough practice around large animals not to worry about that. Brennan laughed. It was a good laugh, honest and unguarded. Calder warned me about you, actually. Finn's hands paused. Did he? He said, and I'm quoting directly here, don't mistake his quiet for deference. Brennan's voice carried a hint of amusement. I've known Calder for 3 years, and I don't think I've ever heard him string that many words together about a person. Finn stood up and looked at Brennan and tried to keep his expression neutral. What else did he say? That you were good at your work. Brennan studied him with the direct attention of someone who was very comfortable with direct attention. He mentioned you 3 times in the 2 days before the tournament started. I counted. That's unusual for a man who speaks as economically as Calder does. Finn had nothing to say to this. He handed Perseus's leg back to him and bent to pick up his kit. He's protective of you, Brennan said. His voice was lighter now, thoughtful rather than pointed. Not in a particular way, more like the way you're protective of something you care about. Finn straightened and looked at him. He's my employer's champion. I tend his horse. It's a professional relationship. Brennan's expression said very clearly that he did not believe this, but he was too smooth to push it directly. Of course, he said pleasantly. He looked at Finn for a moment more. If I asked you to join me for the evening meal tomorrow in my tent, nothing formal, would you say yes? Finn looked at him steadily. Brennan was charming and honest and interested, and Finn's life was, practically speaking, entirely uncomplicated in the sense that there was no actual reason to say no. "I have late rounds tomorrow evening," he said. "The evening after." A pause. "I'll think about it." Brennan smiled. It was a nicer smile than Finn had seen from him yet, less deployed and more genuine. "Fair enough." He clicked for his groom to take Perseus and began to move away. Then over his shoulder, "For what it's worth, whatever you're thinking about, I can see you thinking it. You don't have to decide anything before you're ready." Finn watched him go and stood in the middle of the stable for a moment, feeling the particular discomfort of a person who has been accurately and kindly read by someone they barely know. He did not join Brennan for the evening meal, not because he decided anything specifically, but because that same evening Calder came to the stable later than usual and sat on the fence rail while Finn did the night rounds, and was very quiet in a way that felt different from his usual quiet. The usual quiet was restful. This one had something wound into it. "Brennan asked you to eat with him," Calder said eventually. Finn stopped beside the second stall gate and looked at him. "He told you that." "He mentioned it. He mentioned everything easily. That's who he is." Calder was looking at the dark beyond the stable's open end. "He's a good man, better than he appears at first." "I know," Finn said. Calder was quiet. "I didn't go," Finn said. He wasn't sure why he said it. He wasn't sure what he was trying to give Calder, or what he was hoping to receive in return. But Calder turned to look at him slowly in the lantern light, and whatever was in his expression was so carefully controlled and so briefly unguarded that Finn felt it in his stomach like a fall. "No," Calder said, "I know." They looked at each other for a long moment, and the lantern swayed slightly in a draft from outside, and the horses breathed softly in their stalls, and neither of them said anything else. But something had been said, Finn thought, walking the rest of his rounds alone, something that neither of them had quite managed to say with words. The tournament ended. Sir Brennan Allward departed with Perseus and his 3 grooms and a warm handshake for Finn and a nod for Calder that contained, Finn thought, a fairly specific message that he chose not to translate too carefully. The additional horses left. The borrowed hands went back to town. The stable settled back into its normal rhythms. Calder came back, as Finn had known he would, to the morning visits and the afternoon conversations, and the pattern of presence that had become so woven into Finn's days that he could feel the gaps when it wasn't there. But something had shifted. Finn felt it without being able to name it clearly. The conversations were the same, easy, honest, covering everything from horse breeding to northern geography to the question of whether the eastern road needed more patrol attention, which Calder clearly had opinions about. But there were new silences now, placed differently than before, and they had a different quality. Less restful, more waiting. One afternoon in late spring, they were sitting on the fence rail of the empty paddock, Finn on the middle rail, Calder on the top one, because the height difference meant they ended up roughly eye level that way, watching the 2 gray mares graze in the evening light. They'd been talking about something Finn had already lost the thread of. It had drifted into silence. After a while, Calder said, "Do you want to stay here, at this castle?" Finn looked at him, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Calder seemed to be choosing words carefully, which was unusual for him. He was generally economical but precise. "Is this where you want to spend your life? This stable?" Finn thought about it genuinely. "I haven't thought much further than this." "You should." Calder was looking at the mares, his profile clean against the pale evening sky. "You're wasted here, not because it's bad work, it isn't, but you know more about horses than anyone I've met, including men who have been doing this for 30 years. You could be a master trainer. You could write down what you know." Finn blinked. "Write it down." "About the horses, how you read them, how you handle the difficult ones." Calder turned to look at him. "The things you do that you don't even think about consciously anymore because they're just part of how you work. Someone should write them down." Finn stared at him. No one had ever suggested that the things in Finn's head were worth writing down. It was such an unexpected idea, delivered with such Calder-like certainty, that he didn't know what to do with it. "I'm not," he started. "You are," Calder said simply. He turned back to the mares. "I can read, you have parchment, we could start next week if you want." The "we" was so casually placed, so undefended, that Finn nearly said yes immediately. He stopped himself, partly because he was cautious by nature, and partly because the "we" had done something to his heartbeat. "You'd help me write it down," he said carefully. "If you want." "Why?" Calder was quiet for a moment. "Because someone should," he said, "and I'd like to be the one who does." Finn looked at his hands where they rested on the rail between them, very close to Calder's, not touching. "All right," he said. It became the most improbable project in the castle's history, Finn suspected. 2 evenings a week, Calder brought parchment and ink and sat on the upturned bucket in Finn's small room, and Finn talked about horses, and Calder wrote. Not Finn's words exactly, Calder shaped them as he went, making them cleaner and more ordered, asking questions that forced Finn to articulate things he'd never had to articulate before. But the knowledge was Finn's, unmistakably. His observations, his methods, his understanding. Watching it take shape on the parchment was one of the strangest experiences of Finn's life. The feeling of being seen in a specific, patient, intentional way. "You talk about them like they're people," Calder said one evening, pausing with his quill. "They're not people," Finn said, "but they have inner lives, they remember things, they form preferences, they can be hurt or comforted." He paused. "That's not the same as being a person, but it's also not nothing." Calder wrote that down, which Finn found quietly extraordinary. The room was small. This was a fact that Finn had never particularly cared about before, since he was usually alone in it. With Calder's presence filling it, the smallness was newly apparent in ways that Finn tried not to focus on too directly. Calder's legs stretched out in front of the upturned bucket and nearly reached the opposite wall. The single lamp between them was enough to work by, but not much more, which meant that, when they were both looking at the same section of parchment, they were considerably closer together than they were in the open stable. "Read this back," Calder said one evening, offering him the parchment. Finn leaned over to take it, and their hands overlapped for a moment on the paper's edge. Neither of them moved immediately. Finn felt the warmth of Calder's fingers against his, and his breathing went carefully shallow. He took the parchment. "Read it." His voice was steady by the second line. "That's good," he said. "That's really good." He glanced up and found Calder's eyes already on him, which was startling in the way that things were increasingly startling when Calder was paying attention. Calder had a way of giving his full attention that was its own kind of physical presence. "You think so?" Calder asked. "I know so," Finn said, and because saying what he meant had always come naturally to him, and because the lamplight and the smallness of the room had worn down some of his caution. "You're very good with words, for someone who uses so few of them." Something moved in Calder's expression. Not quite a smile. Calder was restrained with smiles in the way he was restrained with everything, but the shadow of one. "I choose them carefully," he said. "That's all." "I know," Finn said. "I've noticed." A long pause. The lamp swayed. Outside, a horse moved in its stall and settled again. "Finn," Calder said. "Yes." He stopped. He tried again. "There is something." He stopped again, and Finn had never seen Calder unable to finish a sentence, and it did something alarming to his chest. "I'm not sure this is something I should." "Calder," Finn said quietly. "Yes." "The next time you have something to say, say it." "A breath, I'm working on it." "I know," Finn said. "I'll wait." They looked at each other in the lamplight for a long moment, and then Calder picked up the quill, and they went back to the horses. But the something was there now, named without being named, acknowledged without being spoken. And Finn went to sleep that night with the particular feeling of standing on the edge of something very significant, looking at it in the dark. It happened on a Tuesday, which Finn would later think was an unremarkable day for something so consequential. He overheard it by accident, in the way that accidents happen in old stone buildings, because sound carried strangely in the corridors, pooling around corners and bouncing between arches, and Finn had come into the east passage through the wrong door and was 2 seconds away from emerging into the main hall when he heard his own name. Finn, that was Lord Aldrich's voice. He recognized it easily. The stable hand. Yes, Calder's voice. You've been spending a great deal of time in the stables. Smoke needs. Calder, Lord Aldrich's tone was not unkind. It was the tone of a man managing something with careful hands. I'm not questioning your horse's care. I'm asking about yours. A pause. There are people who have noticed. Some of my knights have made comments. Silence. He's good company, Calder said. His voice was perfectly level. Better than most. I don't doubt it, Lord Aldrich sighed. You're my champion, Calder. There are eyes on everything you do, and there are people here, important people, whose goodwill I need to maintain. The tournament, he stopped. Brennan Allward mentioned something before he left. Finn stayed absolutely still in the corridor. Brennan mentioned it to me also, Calder said. I don't see what. Calder, very gentle, very final. Be careful. That's all I'm asking. Be careful and be wise and remember what your position requires. Another long silence. Yes, my lord, Calder said. Finn heard footsteps and pressed himself against the wall and went the way he'd come. He walked back to the stable slowly, in the clear morning light, and he fed the horses and watered them and worked through his morning tasks with the automatic competence of long practice, while something very quiet and very thorough was happening in the center of his chest. He understood what he'd heard. He was not naive. He understood the shape of it, the particular way that good intentions could be wrapped in something that felt like a door closing. Be careful, be wise. Remember what your position requires. Calder's position, and by implication Finn's. He worked through the rest of the morning in silence. When Calder came that afternoon, Finn was in the back paddock with the young mare, and he kept his back to the gate. Finn, Calder said. She's coming on well, Finn said, meaning the mare. She'll be ready to start saddle work in another month. A pause. Finn. I've a lot to get done today. He kept his voice easy, uncomplicated. Better to catch up with you another time. He heard Calder's exhale behind him, controlled but real. All right, Calder said and left. The weeks that followed were some of the worst of Finn's adult life, in the specific, grinding way that isn't dramatic and doesn't look like anything from the outside. He had not decided to be cold to Calder. He had simply been careful, appropriately careful. He kept the conversations brief and professional about Smoke's care and nothing else. He was polite and responsive and gave nothing unnecessary. He did not avoid Calder because that would have been obvious and childish, but he ensured that there was no space in their interactions for the things that had been building between them. It worked in the sense that he kept it all very manageable. It also felt terrible. He told himself this was the right thing. He was a stable hand. Calder was a knight. There were eyes on everything Calder did, and Calder had a position to maintain, and Lord Aldrich needed certain things from his champion, and Finn had understood from the beginning that this was the kind of thing one should understand from the beginning. He had been foolish to forget it, even temporarily. He was correcting the course. He was being responsible. He was also, if he was honest with himself in the hours before dawn when the stables were very quiet, absolutely miserable. Calder, for his part, did not press. He came to the stable daily, tended to Smoke, and matched Finn's careful distance with his own. His visits shortened to match the conversations Finn offered. He was polite. He was correct. He gave Finn everything Finn's behavior said he wanted, which was professional courtesy and nothing more. He left the half-finished parchment on Finn's worktable one morning when Finn was in the paddock. Just left it there, rolled and tied, without a word. Finn unrolled it alone that evening and read what they'd written together, all of it, sitting on his cot in the lamplight. Calder's handwriting was very precise for such large hands. The words were good. They were very good, and they were half of what they could have been. He rolled it up again carefully and put it on the highest shelf. It rained for 4 days straight in midsummer, the kind of relentless gray rain that filled the castle yard with mud and made everyone irritable. On the third day, the gray mare got loose from the paddock. A post had been weakened by the water, and she'd leaned on it in her boredom and pushed through, and Finn spent 2 hours in the rain finding her in the lower meadow, finally catching her with a handful of dried apples and a great deal of patience. He was soaked through and cold and tired, and he was halfway back across the yard leading the dripping mare when he saw Calder crossing from the main hall's side entrance, clearly going somewhere else, and then stopping when he caught sight of Finn. He altered his course without visible hesitation. He took the mare's lead rope from Finn without asking, because his hands were probably steadier, and the mare didn't know him well enough to be difficult, and walked beside Finn in the rain back to the stable without speaking. Inside, they put the mare in her stall. Finn stripped the wet lead rope and hung it to dry. Calder found the stable blankets and handed one to Finn, who stood there holding it for a moment, feeling too many things at once. "Thank you," Finn said. "You're welcome," Calder said. He stood in the middle of the stable aisle in wet clothes without any apparent concern about the wet clothes, and looked at Finn with an expression that Finn had not let himself look at closely in several weeks. There was something in it that was very quiet and very real and very tired. "I heard Lord Aldrich," Finn said. He hadn't decided to say it. It came out. Calder went very still. "In the East Corridor, 3 weeks ago." Finn wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and looked at the floor and then made himself look up, because he'd spent 4 years learning to confront difficult things directly. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I came through the wrong door." "What did you hear?" Calder said. His voice was level. "Enough," Finn paused. "He told you to be careful, to be wise." "Yes." "He was protecting you," Finn said. "I understand that." "He was protecting himself," Calder said. It came out with an edge that surprised Finn, the first edge he'd ever heard in Calder's voice. "And the appearances he needs to maintain, and everything that isn't actually me." He paused. "I understand it too. That doesn't mean I agree with it." Finn looked at him. "I have been," Calder continued in a more controlled tone, "trying to respect what you seem to want. You became distant. I assumed you had your reasons." He met Finn's eyes. "I didn't want to press, but he stopped. I need to know if what I heard was what it sounded like. Was it because of Aldrich, or was it something else?" "It was because of Aldrich," Finn said. "And because," he stopped, tried again, "because I was scared of what I wanted, and it seemed better to stop wanting it." Silence, rain on the stable roof. "Did it work?" Calder asked, quiet. "No," Finn said. "It was entirely ineffective." Something moved in Calder's face, that shadow of a smile, but closer to the surface than Finn had ever seen it. "I wrote you something," Calder said. Finn blinked. "You?" Calder reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a small, folded square of parchment. He held it out. Finn took it with slightly unsteady hands and opened it. It was not long. Calder was economical with his words. It said, in the precise, controlled handwriting that Finn had watched form over 4 months of evenings. "I have not had the courage to say this to your face, which I recognize is a poor trait in a knight. But I have looked for the right words for 3 months, and I would rather give you imperfect ones than none at all. I don't know what this is, or what it should be called, or whether it can be called anything at all, given our positions. But I know that the mornings when I don't come to the stable are worse than the ones when I do, and that I read better when I'm writing for someone who will read it, and that the conversation I want to have when something happens is always with you first. I am not good at wanting things I don't know how to ask for. I'm trying to learn. See. Finn folded the letter very carefully and held it in both hands for a moment. It's not, Calder started. It's perfect, Finn said. Calder stopped. Finn looked up at him. The rain was loud on the roof. The horses breathed in their stalls. The lamp at the end of the aisle cast everything in warm, unsteady gold. I don't know what it can be called either, Finn said, but I know the same things, all the same things. He paused. And I know that spending 3 weeks pretending I didn't was the worst idea I've had in some time. Calder moved toward him, or Finn moved toward Calder, or possibly they moved toward each other by some wordless mutual agreement. And they stopped when they were close, very close, in the middle of the stable aisle, with the warm, solid fact of each other's presence. Calder put his hand on Finn's shoulder. It was gentle and very deliberate, and Finn felt it through the blanket all the way down to something foundational. I don't know how to handle this well, Calder said quietly. He gestured, meaning Lord Aldrich, meaning positions, meaning all of it. I'm not good at. I know, Finn said, I'm not either. They stood close, and the rain came down, and Finn thought about saying several more things and said none of them, because there were some things that were better understood than articulated, and this was one of those. The letter, Finn said finally. You said you'd been trying to find the words for 3 months. Yes. 3 months ago was the night you rode in. A pause, yes. Finn looked at the letter in his hands. The night of strip and kneel and swallow, the 3 commands he'd given and that Calder had followed, the night that had started all of this. You already trusted me then, he said slowly. From the beginning, Calder said quietly, I'm not sure why. Because I didn't flinch, Finn said, half to himself. Because you told me the truth, Calder said, and because you didn't need me to be anything other than what I was, even bleeding and off a horse. Finn held the letter and felt the weight of it, the months it represented. I'm going to finish the book, he said. Calder looked at him for a moment. Yes, he said, I know. What came after was not simple. Finn would not pretend, even to himself, that it became simple. There were still the eyes of the castle, and Lord Aldrich's careful management of appearances, and the particular way that men in Calder's position were expected to order their lives. There were still the weeks when Calder's duties took him away, patrols and council meetings, and a brief campaign in the West from which he returned safely, if exhausted, and came directly to the stables before changing his clothes or reporting formally, which said everything and nothing at once. There were still the ways in which 2 people could be known together, in a world not always inclined to allow it. But there were also the evenings in the small room, writing, and the quiet space that had re-established itself between them that felt different now that everything had been named, not named publicly, not named loudly, but named to each other, which mattered more. There were the morning visits that were never quite just about the horse, and the conversations that ranged everywhere and nowhere, and the particular warmth of being known by someone who chose, deliberately and without fuss, to keep choosing to know you. There was the afternoon in late summer when Finn fell asleep on the hay bales in the hayloft while doing an inventory count, and woke to find Calder sitting on the bale beside him, reading the finished sections of the horse manuscript with total absorption, and felt so unexpectedly, entirely fine about this, that he simply closed his eyes and went back to sleep. There was the morning Lord Aldrich called Finn into the main hall, which had never happened before, and Finn went with his heart in his throat and his hands steady by practiced effort, and found the Lord sitting at his working table with one of the finished manuscript pages in front of him. Calder tells me you have knowledge worth preserving, Lord Aldrich said, looking at the page. Sir Calder has been helping me organize it, my lord, Finn said. I can see that. Lord Aldrich looked up at him with a measuring directness that reminded Finn a little of Calder. I've been speaking with the master of horse at Westmark. He's been looking for someone to help rebuild his training program. A pause. I could recommend you, with a letter. Finn stood very still. Westmark is 2 days' ride, Lord Aldrich said. He was looking at the manuscript again. A position there would come with proper pay and a title, Master Trainer. He paused. It would also, of course, take you away from here. Finn understood this clearly. He had always been good at reading what was actually being said. My lord, he said carefully, may I think about it? Aldrich nodded. Take a week. Finn went back to the stable and thought about it for 1 day. Then he went and found Calder in the training yard and told him what had been offered. Calder listened without interrupting. His face was very still. What do you want? He said when Finn had finished. I want to know what you think, Finn said. That's not what I asked. Finn looked at him. I don't want to go to Westmark. Westmark is an excellent opportunity. I know that. It would give you everything you. Calder, Finn said it the way he always said it, quiet, direct, ending the argument. I don't want to go to Westmark. That isn't what I want. Calder looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, carefully, like a door that is opened very slowly to see what's on the other side. Then tell Aldrich no, he said, and stay. That's it, Finn said, just stay. Just stay, Calder said. I'll manage the rest. Finn didn't ask what that meant specifically. He'd learned by then that when Calder said he would manage something, he generally did in the deliberate, thorough way he did everything. He told Lord Aldrich no the following morning. Aldrich looked at him for a moment, expression unreadable, and then nodded once and went back to his papers. As you like, he said. That was all. 2 weeks later, Aldrich announced at the evening meal that Finn had been promoted to master groom of the castle stables, with a proper wage and a larger room and an official title. He made the announcement matter-of-factly, between 2 other items of business, and did not look particularly at Calder while he said it. Finn, hearing it from the back of the hall where he'd been asked to attend for reasons he now understood, stood very still for a moment. He looked across the room at Calder, who was seated at the high table with the other knights, who was looking at the tablecloth with a carefully arranged neutral expression that did not quite conceal the slight tension around his jaw that Finn had learned over months to recognize as the thing Calder's face did when he was trying not to show something. Finn nodded once, very slightly. Calder didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth moved. The real summer storm came in August, the kind that swept in from the hills in the space of an hour and turned the sky purple-black and threw lightning down onto the fields, while the thunder shook the stones of the castle walls. The horses needed to be inside and secure, and Finn moved through his rounds quickly with a lantern that kept nearly blowing out in the drafts, making sure every stall was properly latched, every animal calm. The young mare was the last. She was always the most nervous in storms, packing and shaking her head, and Finn went in with her and stood with her for a while the way he always did, hand on her neck, talking steadily about nothing in particular until her breathing slowed. He didn't hear Calder come in above the noise of the rain. He became aware of him gradually, the way you become aware of warmth near a fire, not one particular moment but a kind of increasing consciousness. He turned his head and Calder was standing at the stall gate, watching, lantern in hand. She's all right, Finn said. I know, Calder said. I could hear you talking. Finn looked at him. How long have you been standing there? A few minutes. A pause. I came to make sure Smoke was settled. He was. Then I heard you. The mare had stilled under Finn's hand. Outside, the thunder rolled and the rain hammered the roof. Inside, the stable was small and warm and lit by 2 lanterns, and Finn stood in the stall with his horse and looked at the man at the gate. You could come in, Finn said. It was a simple enough offer. There was room in the stall. Calder let himself in and stood on the other side of the mare, and the storm continued outside, and they stood in comfortable parallel for a while, both of them with one hand on the horse. After a time, Calder's hand moved slightly and covered Finn's on the mare's neck. Finn didn't move. He felt Calder's hand, large and warm and very still, and looked at it, and then looked at Calder's face in the lantern light. Calder was already looking at him. "I meant what I wrote," Calder said quietly. "I know," Finn said. "And more," Calder said. "I meant more than I was able to write." Finn turned his hand over under Calder's slowly, so their fingers overlapped. "I know that too," he said. The storm was very loud outside. The mare had completely settled. The two of them stood in the gold light with their hands together over the horse's warm flank, and Finn thought about the night in November when a bleeding man had ridden in and given him 3 commands, and how little he had known, that night, what they were the beginning of. Strip Neil Swallow. Strip away the armor. That had been the first. Not just the steel, though it had been that too, but all the other armor as well, the kind that people wore in their faces and their voices and their careful arrangements of dignity. Kneel, not submission, something older and simpler. Get low enough to see each other clearly. Swallow, accept the medicine, even when you don't want to. Let the thing that hurts you be treated instead of hidden. He had given those commands on a pragmatic autumn midnight, thinking only about a wound and a tired horse. And Calder had followed them, everyone, not just that night but in every way that followed. And Finn, in his own time and his own way, had followed them back. "There's something I want to say," Finn said. Calder waited. "You're the best person I've met," Finn said simply. "That's all. I know it's not complicated, but I haven't said it and you should know it." The shadow of a smile that lived around Calder's mouth was more present than Finn had ever seen it. "You're the most honest person I've ever known," Calder said, "and the bravest in the way that counts." "I'm a stable hand," Finn said. "Yes," Calder agreed, "and you're the bravest person I know." Outside, the thunder softened as the storm began to move on. The rain continued, but the worst of it was passing. The mare shifted contentedly in the straw. Finn looked at their hands. He turned slightly, and Calder turned at the same moment, and they were very close in the stall's warm dimness. And Finn looked up at Calder's face, and Calder looked down at his, and the lantern swayed. The storm moved on. Some things are written in gold for the people who lived them, and in space for everyone else. Morning came slow and gray and washed clean, the way mornings do after summer storms. The castle yard was muddy and fresh. The sky was the pale silver of very early light. Finn was at the paddock gate with a cup of tea when Calder appeared at the stable door. He had left sometime in the night when the storm had fully passed. Finn had expected that. It was not that things were secret, only that some things were private, which was different, and Calder was a man who understood the difference. He came and stood beside Finn at the fence. Finn offered him the tea. Calder took it and drank from it without comment, which was either deeply companionable or very presumptuous, and Finn decided it was the first. They watched the horses move in the wet morning light. "I've been thinking," Calder said. "About what?" "The manuscript." He handed the cup back. "It's good enough to send to Westmark. You should send it, not go yourself, send it, with a letter explaining the method." Finn looked at him sideways. "You want me to send the thing to the place you talked me out of going to?" "I talked you out of nothing. You decided yourself." Calder looked at him steadily. "But the knowledge should go somewhere it can be used. You staying here doesn't have to mean the work staying here." Finn thought about this. It was so characteristic, the practicality of it, the complete absence of any concern about credit or recognition. The immediate turn toward what was useful. "That's a good idea," Finn said. "Most of my ideas are," Calder said, and Finn laughed, actually laughed openly in the morning light, because Calder had said it with such perfect, deadpan certainty. He heard Calder's exhale quiet, almost a laugh himself. "I have a question," Finn said. "Yes." "The 3 months, when you said you'd been finding the words for 3 months." He leaned on the fence rail and looked at the gray mare, who had come to the near end of the paddock and was watching them with interest. "Was it from the night you rode in, or was there something before?" Calder was quiet for a moment. "Smoke," he said. "6 months before, I was watching you with him. You'd had a difficult week with him. He was testing everything, and you were standing in the stall talking to him." He paused. "You didn't know I was there. You told him something had to change, and he had to trust you with it even if it was hard." Finn stared at him. "That was 8 months ago." "8 months ago," Calder confirmed. "You've been 8 months." "I'm patient," Calder said, without particular inflection. Finn turned to look at him fully. "Calder, 8 months." "You're worth patience," Calder said simply. Finn looked at him for a long moment. This enormous, quiet, extraordinarily patient man who had waited 8 months, and spent 3 more finding exact words on a small square of parchment, who had mucked stalls and wrapped ankles and written careful hours of a manuscript and ridden home bleeding on a tired horse, and given himself over to a stable boy's instructions without a moment's argument. "You are," Finn said, "the most ridiculous person I have ever met." "Probably," Calder agreed. "And the best," Finn said. "I meant that last night and I mean it now." Calder looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said. "You always mean what you say." The gray mare had come all the way to the fence now and was stretching her nose toward them. Finn offered her his hand without looking away from Calder. She mouthed at his fingers. "I want to start the second section of the manuscript this week," Finn said. "Tuesday evening," Calder said. "Tuesday evening." They stood in the clean morning light, and the mare snuffled between them, and somewhere in the castle above the yard, a bell began to ring for the morning meal, and neither of them moved quite yet. This was it, Finn thought. Not the dramatic thing, not the moment in the storm or the letter on parchment or even the night with the armor and the lantern. This was the actual thing. This easy, quiet, entirely ordinary morning. 2 people standing at a fence who knew each other. He could have had things be simpler. He could have kept the distance. He could have said yes to Westmark and gone away from this castle and this stable and this enormous, patient, improbable person and made something clean and uncomplicated somewhere else. But he was 19 years old, and he had learned from horses that the honest thing and the safe thing were not always the same thing, and that trust was built slowly and meant something because of that slowness, and that some things were worth tending even when they were difficult. He picked up the empty teacup and looked at the fence line and the horses and the pale morning sky, and felt the simple, extraordinary fact of not being alone. "Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," Calder agreed. And they went in for breakfast. 2 weeks later, Finn sent the manuscript to Westmark. He sent it with a proper covering letter, which Calder helped him draft and which described the methods without any author's credit, just the knowledge, clear and organized and useful. The reply came back in 3 weeks. The Westmark master of horse wanted to know who had written it and whether there was more. Finn sent his name this time, just his name, and 3 more sections that they'd finished. 6 months after that, the reply that came back was a formal letter of recognition from the Lord of Westmark, thanking the master groom of Aldrich's castle for a contribution to the training of horses that had already changed the way his program operated. It was addressed to Finn by name and title. Lord Aldrich called Finn to the hall again to show it to him. He looked at it for a long moment, and then at Finn with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "Well done," he said quietly, "well done." After that things changed, slowly in the way that all things worth changing change, not dramatically, not perfectly, but genuinely. Calder still came to the stables every morning. He still sat on the fence rail and talked about everything and nothing, and still helped with the manuscript on Tuesday evenings, and still brought ink and parchment, and took up too much space in the small room in the comfortable way that Finn had stopped trying to pretend wasn't his favorite part of the week. He was still large and quiet and patient and relentlessly honest, and capable of going 8 months without saying something, because he wanted to say it exactly right. Finn was still a stable hand, a master groom now, officially, with a wage and a title and an increasingly well-regarded manuscript, but a stable hand by nature, by preference, by the deep conviction that honest work done well was enough. He was still dark-haired and calloused-handed and very hard to rattle, and he still talked to horses when he was thinking through difficult things, which Calder had now entirely accepted as a personality feature rather than an eccentricity. They were still figuring out how to be what they were. Finn suspected that was not going to stop. He was beginning to suspect that was precisely what it was supposed to feel like, not a finished thing but an ongoing one, the way a good horse took years of patient work and was never quite done becoming. He told this to Smoke one morning in early autumn, standing with his hand on the horse's neck in the gold-lit stable. Smoke received this information with equine solemnity. He'd agree, Finn told him. He's patient about that kind of thing. About what kind of thing? Calder said from the gate. Finn turned. Calder was standing in the morning light, the same way he'd stood 8 months before that, when Finn hadn't known he was there, and the same way he'd stood on the night he'd ridden in Bleeding, and the same way he'd stood every morning in between. Unfinished things, Finn said. Calder came into the stable. He stopped beside Smoke and put his hand next to Finn's on the horse's neck, the familiar gesture, the thing they'd started in the storm and kept on doing. I prefer unfinished things, Calder said. They're still becoming something. Finn looked at him. That's surprisingly poetic, Finn said. I've been writing a great deal lately, Calder said. It has an effect. Finn smiled. Actually smiled, the full thing, the one that he didn't produce for most people. Calder watched it happen with an expression that was as close to undone as Finn had ever seen him come. Come on, Finn said. Help me with the morning feed. I don't. You've been watching me do it for a year. You know the order. I know Smoke's order. You can learn the others. Finn picked up the first bucket and looked at him. You're patient, you said so yourself. Calder looked at him for a moment, and then the shadow of the smile went all the way. Just briefly, just barely, but fully. All right, he said, and reached for the next bucket. Epilogue, the last page. The finished manuscript went to 12 different castles over the following 2 years. Calder personally delivered the third copy to a training facility 3 territories east, which was, practically speaking, an important diplomatic mission and not, Finn told himself, just an excuse for Calder to spend 4 days riding with a purpose that happened to involve dropping off something they'd made together. The facility's master sent back a letter saying it was the finest thing of its kind he had ever read. Finn read the letter standing in his stable in the clear autumn light, and felt something warm and real and large enough to hold. He thought about the night 2.5 years ago, when the first thing he'd seen was a silhouette at the gate, and the first thing he'd understood was that a person was trying very hard not to fall. He thought about 3 words: strip, kneel, swallow, that had sounded like commands but had been, he understood now, something more like a beginning. Strip the armor away, get low enough to see each other, swallow the thing that heals you. He'd been trying, more or less, ever since. He thought Calder had been too. The gray mare came up to the paddock fence and reached for his hand with her soft nose, and Finn gave her the dried apple slice from his pocket and scratched behind her ears, and heard, at the stable gate, the sound of a horse arriving, a gray destrier, a familiar, measured tread beside it. Calder was back. Finn did not rush. He scratched the mare's ears for a moment longer because she was good and patient and deserved it. Then he walked to meet him. This was not the end of anything. It was not a neat completion or a final answer or a moment that wrapped itself in certainty. It was just a morning, and a man coming back from a ride, and another man walking toward him across a stable yard, and all the things between them that were still becoming. Finn thought that was enough, more than enough. He'd survived 3 commands. He intended to keep surviving everything that came after. If this story found its way into your heart, if you sat with Finn and Calder and felt every pause and every almost spoken word, please leave this video a like. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything. Subscribe if you want to live in more worlds like this one, where love is slow and honest and worth the waiting. And drop a comment below. Did Calder's letter break you? Or was it the storm in the stable that did it? Tell me which moment got you. And one last thing. Lord Aldrich has a younger knight. His name is Rowan, and he has been watching a certain stonecutter's apprentice rebuild the castle's eastern wall for 3 months. The stonecutter's apprentice has not looked up once. Not once. Should I tell you what happens when he finally does?